Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. I am delighted as ever to be joined by Dan Well, our returning guest for Basket and Barometer January edition, looking back at December 2025. So it's a big one, Di.
It is a big one. It's the one we were anticipating and looking up to see what was happening.
So go on then, hit us with the headlines.
I would love to be bringing you some fantastic news, Simon. Unfortunately, that isn't the case, and I'm sure everyone listening to this probably is aware anyway. So I've got a range of indicators that we're looking at, and it's actually quite an interesting landscape we're looking at. So the primary indicators, the one that everyone looks at, is footfall and sales, and they don't present a particularly great picture for December. So footfall, according to Sensormatic, was down overall, and this is footfall into retail stores was down 2.9%. The hardest hit of the three channels, shopping centres, retail parks and high streets, were shopping centres, and footfall dropped there by 5.1. High streets is slightly better, more robust, at just a drop of 0.9, and retail parks in the middle at 2.5 down. So, there were fewer people going into stores, and I think all the retailers out there will probably be aware of that. The BRC produced retail sales numbers, of course, for December, and they're actually up by 1.2%, but all of that increase was driven by food, and that went up 3.1% year on year. Non-food overall dropped by 0.3%, and non-food in-store sales dropped by 0.5%. So, it was clearly a case of people prioritising food, but underlying that, behind that sits, of course, inflation. And inflation on food is still over 4%, whereas inflation on, say, clothing and footwear is 0 or negative. So, where they prioritise food, you're going to pay more for it, so sales go up. So that's overall sales. And then when we focus a little bit more detail on high streets, on towns and cities, the Beauclair data looks at this, and they again recorded a drop in sales in December of 3.6% year on year. I'd say it's better than last December when sales dropped by 7.9%. So, it's an improved picture, if you can call a negative an improved picture. But they have 5 key sectors that account for the majority of sales in towns and cities: fashion, food and drink, which is hospitality, general retail, grocery, and health and beauty. And all of those, all the discretionary ones, health and beauty, fashion, and also general retail, will have big drops of about 8-9%. The best performing sectors were food and drink, so that's hospitality at 2.3% down, and grocery at 2.9% down. So it really was a cutting back on discretionary items. So, it was a December of caution, and it was that caution in high streets was driven by fewer customers. There just weren't as many people buying products, and at the same time, the ATV rose, which is a reflection of inflation. Because obviously, if things cost more, you spend more. So fewer people were buying products, but actually, what they were paying for them rose. So, the grocery was the only key sector where the ATV actually increased by 3.4%, reflecting inflation. So it was an inflationary month. People were cautious, and so that flowed straight through into pulling back on what they spending and what they had to spend, really. And of course, we've talked in the past about savings, and savings are still high. So people are plummeting their money into their bank accounts.
And was there a particular reason why shopping centres were so down based on high street and retail parks?
Well, partly I think because shopping centres have less food and drink offer and less grocery offer, so they tend to be mainly non-food. They have improved a lot in their terms of their food and drink offer, but they tend to be more daytime stuff, supporting a shopping trip as opposed to going out for a meal or going out to be entertained in the evening. So if you're shopping less, you tend to go to shopping. If you're shopping less, you'll go to less shopping centres. At the same time, I've always seen this over sort of the decades I've been working in the industry, that when things are tough, people pull back from going to big centres because it gets to be expensive. The travel's expensive, the parking's expensive. They don't have the money to spend. They tend to stay local. And in fact, some of the work I'm doing for Beauclair at the moment, I don't want to plug anything, but there's a webinar in February, on February 11th, where we're talking about the year. But we've seen small towns do better last year and actually increase spend in small towns, and it decreased in medium and large towns. So people are staying local again. Partly for a bit of authenticity, I think that's coming through, but also people don't want to spend money getting to places, parking in places when they don't have it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And We're cautious. I think you've used that word a couple of times in terms of consumers. That's linked to other external factors. So I know we talked before about unemployment being a relatively record high. Certainly, I think it's either under 24s, is it, and kind of university leavers.
Yeah, it is. And also, unemployment generally, we're at the highest level we've been since COVID. So even in people in employment have been feeling quite vulnerable because, and we've had all the jitters through the year with regarding the budget. And, we started with the increase in national insurance contributions and the threshold, and of course the national living wage, which affected a lot of employers. And they pulled back on recruitment initially, and then they have been making some redundancies. So people feel very vulnerable. And so then that flows through into how much they're saving as well. So savings ratio is very high. It's still come down a little over the last quarter, but it's still pretty high, and it's the highest again since COVID. So people, where they are earning money, and there is wage inflation, so wages are going up by about 4 or 5% in the private sector, over 7% in the public sector. They're being cautious with that money and making sure that they have their savings in place. And so, of course, if they're saving, they're not saving.
Yeah. So we're being cautious. I suppose there's always that. We head into spring, Easter's relatively early, then we're into the whole debate about booking summer holidays and all those other bits that tend to start to form in people's minds this year. So it'd be interesting over the next couple of months how those bigger purchases or considered purchases start to come into play, if at all.
Absolutely. And we're right at the beginning of the year. And so it is hard to predict what's going to happen. I mean, an interesting element I've always looked at is the GfK Consumer Confidence Index as well, because the amount we're willing as consumers to spend is as much about how confident we feel about our employment and how secure we feel in employment and how we feel where the economy is going. And GfK cover that in their regular panel interviews. So they're actually come very early in terms of their results, GfK. So they've got results for December and January already. And January has improved slightly on December, which improved on November. So we're now sitting at an index in January of the overall consumer confidence index of -16. Now, that sounds pretty bad and it's not great, but it hasn't been better than -13 since January 2024. So, we're not bad. And January 25, it was -2022, and now it's -16. So it's, improved by a quarter, which is pretty good. And it's interesting that actually that GfK asked about different elements of people's confidence, so about their confidence around the economy and also their own personal situation. And where the confidence has improved, it's around particularly people's personal situation. So they're feeling better about where they were over the last 12 months, which is a bit strange, but also where they're going over the next 12 months. So the index for what people feel about their personal situation over the next 12 months improved from 1 in November to 2 in December to 6 in January. So people are starting to feel that we're coming out of the worst of it, and they're starting to feel a little bit more stable. We've got all of those jitters around the budget and what may happen, as people are starting to feel perhaps that things are getting on a bit of a level playing field. And hopefully that will flow through into retail sales.
Fingers crossed. Some of those figures, like you say, don't sound great, but we're coming from a much worse place. So hopefully heading into, I know we talked about this probably last year at this time and the year before, those green shoots of spring. But we are unfortunately as well at that time when we get those retailers that didn't quite make it through in the news. Time of recording, Russell and Bromley have just been sold to Next. There was a few bits last week around, I think it was Claire's again, and the original factory shop potentially going into administration or receivership. So that'll kind of flush out in the next couple of months, I would have thought, as people get through the Christmas, consolidate, and I suppose find out if they're still viable and sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, but I'm a bit of a pragmatist around retailers and their ability to continue to trade. I mean, all retail and any consumer-driven operation has its peaks and troughs and its trends. And, you look at Claire's accessories, they've had financial issues for a number of years. And if you look at the structure of the market has moved away from them. You have Primark, who sell everything Claire's sell, and they're more appealing to youngsters now. And actually, sometimes it just comes down to the ability of the business to bend to the market and reshape itself. And Claire's is a massive business. It's like moving a super tanker. It's very, very difficult. And they're in very highly rented premises in shopping centres, which pay high rent, high rates, and you've got to sell a lot of hair clips to make that pay. And likewise, the original factory shop has had issues for a while. And again, that's, I think, down to the retailer. Russell and Bromley is interesting because they're a retailer of my youth. Everyone aspired to be able to shop in Russell and Bromley. And their brand will still remain. But, in the retail market where there are hundreds and hundreds of retailers, you can pull out 3 or 4 that fail perhaps a year. And I think that's a natural trend.
Yeah. And it's always funny, isn't it? Because you look at LinkedIn and it affects people's jobs and lives, which is really unfortunate. But no one's ever surprised by the names, unfortunately, either. So we feel bad, certainly those of us that worked in retail and, think about other people as well. But it's never, that was a shock. I didn't see it coming.
No, exactly. And unfortunately, the excitement and the thrill of retail, and why, we all work in retail and enjoy working in retail, is that it is constantly evolving. It is constantly changing. It reflects consumer behaviour and culture. And unfortunately, that's what kills some retailers, and it's very difficult for retailers, particularly when they're very large retailers, to come back. I mean, that's, if you look at, the epitome of coming back, it's M&S really. From, I remember 10 years ago when they were closing stores all the time and they'd come out the FTSE index and everyone was, forecasting its demise, and look at them now. So it's possible, and they've done a fabulous job in that. But it's taken them a decade or so to do that.
Yeah, and it's all cyclical, isn't it? So my son probably wouldn't, maybe for clothes, but he wouldn't go to M&S for food because it's just not in their DNA. They go to Subways or Sainsbury's or, so things will come around as well if you're not ahead of the game. So disappointing for those brands, but I suppose as consumers, I think, again, we've said it before, we've voted with our feet and not shopped there for whatever reasons are personal to us, but primarily probably for not being in line with where everybody else is or being special enough to make the difference.
Absolutely. And I mean, the media, love a line, it's the death of the high street, and it never is the death of the high street, particularly as a lot of retailers who, often go out of business aren't in the high street. So, I mean, the original factory shop's not in the high street. And so, it will never be the death of the high street, but it is the evolution of the high street, and you'll get more retailers coming in. In fact, as consumers, we need the high street to change. Otherwise, it would be a very boring place, So it offers opportunities for new incomers to take space and to prosper in physical stores.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, we'll pause on that note. We'll see what January brings. I have a funny feeling I know what January normally brings, with people paying off bills and tightening the belts a little bit and getting ready for the rest of the year. But the figures will speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Di. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Simon.